Ha. Good morning. Good morning. Yes, I am here behind the banner. How are you doing? Welcome to Journey to SEA 2025. If you are new to the program, welcome, welcome. So glad you are here. I am Shelley Ann Edwards Barron, a creative writing specialist. And every Tuesday, I am here to talk about report writing, narrative writing, and comprehension. And today we have quite a few things to cover. And I want to I guess get into it quickly because I have a couple things I want to say before we get into the actual presentations. So let me get started with that so that I could let's see, let me go back. Yeah, I'm gonna get the hang of this thing eventually. I keep getting into snags to get this thing in. So, all right. So while I'm sorting that out, let me remind you of a little bit about who I am and what I do. So, I work with multisensory learning to make learning really interesting for students. So, I find ways to integrate activities like games and experiments and artwork and all those things so that students could learn using all their senses and interact with all their senses. Because if you think about it, this is the way we interact with life. We smell things, we see things, we hear things, and sometimes all at once, sometimes one after the other. But certainly an experience isn't absolutely complete unless we have several senses working together. So I incorporate that kind of thing in my instruction so that students can really engage with reading, writing, and answering the comprehension questions. So, all right, so let's see. Am I sorted out with the tech? Mm, uh, tree. All right, I'm just gonna have to click through it for some reason. Every time I click share, it is not sharing properly. So let's just go to the screen and we'll figure it out as we go because I know we really want to get started. Today we're dealing with passive voice, reactions, and I just saw that. So yeah, let me fix it before we continue because I can. Um, yeah, I'm operating on a few hours sleep this morning, but I'll show you what was happening and what got me excited over the weekend and all the stuff I was doing. That's one of the things I want to share with you before we get totally started with the session. So let me see if I could get that all sorted out now. Hmm. Ah, yeah, finally. Thank you for your patience. All right, so let's get it in. So, yeah, there we are. So, this week we are dealing with passive voice, reactions to climax, and reading poetry. Now, we're going to look at both active and passive voice, what they are, and how they impact on the report writing. But the thing that I want to really focus on a little bit is the passive voice because some students know about it. Well, they know how to do it, but others don't. And I think it's one of those things that can really enhance a student's writing if it is the student is struggling with being formal and getting that formal tone done. Passive voice is one of those things. And of course, after my rant on Climax last week, we do have to talk about reactions to Climax. If you haven't seen it, please give it a check because what I did was to go through the plot process and look at what Climax actually is, where it's located in the plot, and how it functions. And so that's a really good understanding to have before we you go into the reaction to climax. And then today we're starting to read poetry this week. And so we'll talk a little bit about that, what poetry is, its purpose, and how all those things are going to help. Knowing all those things, let me rephrase that. How knowing all those things would help students when they're doing poetry comprehension. Wow, yeah, today is just one of those days, but let me so a couple of things have been on my mind. So let me get those out of the way quickly so we can get to the passive voice and all those other things. So we are in June and graduation is in the air, and I hadn't, originally thought too much about it, but now is the time when we hear lots of graduations are happening. I know many of my students had graduation um last week, late last week. Some are having this week, and some even like early next week. Teachers are celebrating success and celebrating all the hard work of the students of 2024. They have done their stuff, and I know we are full on heading into 2025, but I felt like it was absolutely necessary to pause and say congratulations to all the students who wrote the exams. Regardless of the results are coming out later. Regardless of the results, these students put in some work, they did some things, and they need to celebrate that. And I think it's awesome that the graduations are happening before results, because the results would not taint or overshadow the graduation. We really want to set aside some time to enjoy the fact that this, we're done. The students have worked really hard, and, they've done all those things. It's behind them now. Regardless of what choices happen and what happens next, at this point in time, we can celebrate, and it's a good thing to celebrate. But while we're doing that, and I didn't really mean to say but, although that's kind of what's in my mind, I I really wanted to mention something. Now, when I was young, I actually don't even remember my primary school graduation. I don't know how many people actually do, but I don't remember everything that happened around mine, because I don't think in my family those kinds of things were taken too seriously. And so I sort of blocked it out. I suspect if I, go back in time and really dig it up and dig up the thoughts, there would be something there that I might need to attend to. But I honestly don't remember it. And I'm thinking about, like graduation for my kids. And because of my own thing, I do feel, looking back, there's a lot of hindsight and, what ifs and those kinds of things with my kids. And I remember in the group SEA Peaceful Approach, Giselle, one of the other admins, she shared a video where a lady was giving her experience about being at graduation as a child, and when the results, no graduation, I think that was results, when the results came out, and nobody was there for her. I feel like a lot of that happens at graduation as well. When students are called up and they see all their friends getting hugs and this and that, and, doing things, and then they're just there, they don't receive anything. And sometimes teachers have to go above and beyond to make sure that these students feel loved. And it's something that I think we all should really seriously think about as parents and teachers and tutors. We really do need to think about these things. Um, Friday, I met an acquaintance in the supermarket, and she had a cake in her hand. So, I'm joking, and I said, "Hey, enjoy, whose birthday?" It was a She runs a daycare, and it was a student, one of the attendees of the daycare. It was the child's birthday, and the child's father didn't have any funds to do anything for the child's birthday, but everybody else, when birthdays come up, would get a cake and drink and those things, and they would really feel loved in that way. And so the lady was buying a cake for the child. And sometimes we need to do these things. And I know this isn't what you're exactly here for today. We'll get into the details, but It's really weighing heavily on my mind because last night I received a text message from a colleague of mine who runs a charity, and she's trying to get coverage for a few students to attend graduation. These days, graduations cost, and they cost a pretty penny, even at the primary school level, because things cost money. And so what is happening is that so she got the clothes already sorted, shoes, transport to and from. What she's looking for is coverage for the tickets. So she reached out. I told her anytime you need anything, because I know she deals with the charity and she's working with kids and so on, and families who need support. So she reached out to me. And just to hear the fact that these students don't have the opportunity to attend graduation unless somebody else, like me and the other people who are supporting, reach out. I don't know, it just really weighed a lot on my mind this morning. So, as I was preparing, I thought it would be a good idea to, kind of mention, if you can, yeah, it's emotional. If you can help, it makes a difference. Right? And I'm going to leave it at that so that I can actually finish the session. So, all right, back to why I'm losing sleep. I've been working on these things. Um, I think it was Thursday or Friday. This term, I'm working with a couple of standard one students, a couple of standard two students, a few standard three students, because I really wanted to get into a really good understanding of why students are struggling with creative writing at standards 4 and 5. So, the same way that when I saw it happening at university, I decided let me get to the primary school level to see if I could get it at the source. I started working with 4s and 5s, and then I realized that students are entering 4 and 5 with gaps, and it's not because teachers aren't working really hard, but sometimes working hard is not enough. We need to work smart, and we need to be able to have the right strategies. Because if you work really hard with the wrong strategies, you're not going to get a good result, even if you're working really hard. So I decided this term to accept a few students at the lower primary school level, and I'm honestly really beginning to understand why students are struggling. And that's part of the reason I had that rant with Climax last week, because of what I'm seeing at the lower level and how the progression is being made. And so, one of my standard two students, um, reached out, the parent reached out and she said, okay, her daughter had this assignment to do and they're working on it, but the child is struggling and they needed some assistance. So I decided to create a worksheet. So I did the template and I sent it, and I'm starting on the worksheet. And to be honest, the worksheet went from 3 pages to 12 pages. Now I'm at 37 pages. And that's this one, the 3 paragraph storytelling, because at standard two, students should be already introduced to writing 3 paragraph stories. Now, funny enough, standard one students are also at the end of standard one, they're introduced to the 3 paragraph story. I have some feelings about that, because I think 3 paragraphs at standard one, we're spending time at advanced concepts, when at standard one, students should really be dealing with more foundation things like expanding their sentences and adding in descriptions and, a little bit about the characters and the figurative language. That should be the focus on in standard one. And we could do all of that in random sentences and paragraphs. So students should really be understanding what a paragraph is and how to create that and how to deal with that for both reports and narratives, not yet working on 3 paragraphs. Standard two is where we expand that knowledge into the three paragraph story where you get the connection between the ideas. Standard one, we should really just be introducing the ideas and make sure they understand it, what it looks like, how to create it. And then in standard two, we look at the connections between the ideas when we start putting things together. And so right now, I am working on this three paragraph story. It's a simplified approach to writing an exciting story in three paragraphs. It is definitely possible. Students need to know how to do certain things and how to order it. So what I've done in that one is, so there's a template, what to go in each paragraph, and then there's a section for each paragraph, what to do, how to do it. For the introduction, we go into detail because the first and second sentence are extremely important. So we go into detail on how to create those, what they're supposed to be, and then we get to paragraph two, how to create that. Paragraph three, how to create that. There are a couple prompts, a couple of samples of three paragraph stories. And so this would work very well for standard two students. It might be slightly advanced for some standard one students. Those who are in standard one transition into standard two could benefit from it. And now everything is digital so far, and $75 digital because like I said, right now I'm at page 37 and I have at least 10 to 20, 15 to 20 more pages to add. So by the time I'm finished, it's going to be a proper textbook. Um, 75 would be the digital version. Once I get it in print, then I'd be able to say what the print version would be. I'll tell you more about this as we go because, like I said, still in progress. I'm aiming for month end, which is next week, to finish this one. That's the one in the middle. But that has kept me up at night, and I have been like obsessed with creating this because I see the need for it and how urgently students need this. And for those students who are really, really struggling with writing the four, five, etc. paragraph story, they can start with a three paragraph story and write an excellent three paragraph story and still score well. So if it is you're working with a student or a child who just can't seem to get it, they're really struggling, whether they have any learning challenges or not, they're really struggling with it. And I think this would work really well for students going into SCA 2025 who have challenges that make it really difficult for them to write extensively. They can focus on just getting three paragraphs done extremely well, and they can produce excellent stories from that. So this, when it's finished, and like I said, the introduction is done, the overview is done, the first paragraph is done, three-quarter way through, finishing up notes on the second paragraph, and about halfway through the third paragraph notes as well. So yeah, I don't go in linear order. I kind of whatever is on my mind, I work on that section, and so it's something to really take a look at. Now, the first one, creating reader avatars. This also is on my mind. In SCA Peacefield, someone asked about helping students separate reports and narratives in their minds, and I'll explain to you what I explained to that parent. The trouble with how some creative writing is taught is that students see writing as just that straight up writing. So when they have creative writing, whether it's a report or narrative, they have creative writing. And even though teachers teach them separately, and you can't even teach them together and still get the students to think separately, right? But there's a process. Even though it's often taught separately, students still see it simply as creative writing. And when they don't have a clear understanding of what the purpose of a report is and who the readers are, and they don't have a really clear understanding of the purpose of a narrative and who the readers actually are, what's going to happen is that they're just going to approach it as straight up writing. And then when they write, they write. And so there is little planning, there's little understanding of the impact on a reader of the words and the language that they use. And so that is creating a problem. So, what I do with my students to help them make that complete separation in their minds of the reports and the narratives is that I have them create what I call a reader avatar. Now, an avatar is just like an icon, a piece of artwork that you create to represent a person. And so what we do is to discuss what readers of reports are looking for and what readers of narratives are looking for. And then we personify the reader as a character. We give them names, we draw them with colors, we give them personalities, and we outline their expectations when it comes to what the student would be writing. And so we try to create like crazy fun names for the narrative avatars. Um, like I think I'd mentioned this before, but I can't remember any of them off the top of my head. But um I like the name Penelope just because of the way it's pronounced. So crazy names, Penelope with the red hat, that kind of, and believe me, the students are way more creative than I am, right? And they come up with some really exciting names. And then for the report avatar, they come up with very strict names, so like Sir and Madam and Captain and, really formal sounding names. And then what happens after that? So after we go through the process of creating the avatar, after that, what we do is that when they're writing, I remind them, remember Penelope with the red hat, she's reading this and she has these expectations. Sorry. She has these expectations. And so the student now has this person in mind who they are writing to, who has these expectations, and it helps them think of the narrative in a particular way and about, how they are producing information for somebody who has to receive it in a specific way. And then they do the same with the report writing avatar. So I tell them things like, hey, Captain Longfellow, he is reading your report. And so he has expectations. So you don't want to do this for him. You have to write it in this particular way for him. And so what that does, it pulls the student out of the academic only situation, and it has them thinking about who their readers are and how to fulfill expectations for their readers. And of course, those expectations are the requirements for the assignment. So at the end of the day, everybody wins because the students have a way to separate the reports and narratives, and they're therefore better able to write more effectively for each one. So I've started working on packaging that activity. Now, I do it with my students and I just explain the whole thing to you. But of course, having a worksheet that you could say, okay, let's go through it in this way, put this here, put that there, it makes things a whole lot easier. So I'm packaging that as well to make that available, how to distinguish between reports and narratives and keep ideas separate. So we don't want the descriptions in the reports and we don't want the formal language in the narratives. We have to be able to keep that separate. And then finally, the word studies. Excuse me, these are actually finished. What I'm still working on is getting the answers up on the website. But these are actually finished. You can get these now. And not everything is up on the website yet, so you'll have to WhatsApp me. The number is here, 717 4993. But and these include comprehension. So if you're looking for a very interactive way to work on comprehension. There are readings that are just straight up for reading, and then there's a comprehension passage. So there are two readings in each booklet. One to read just for fun, and one to read specifically for comprehension. So booklet one has two fiction pieces. Booklet two has a fiction and a non-fiction piece. And booklet three, which I'm in process of doing, that one would have non-fiction and poetry. So I'm spreading it out so that you get different kinds of comprehension in between all of that. Right. So yeah, so these are the things that keep me up at night, and I'm really diligently working toward creating sufficient resources so that you can have accurate, interactive, effective resources that get students engaged, and you don't have to um it's not going to be as distressing when students have to work on these kinds of activities. They're learning, they're enjoying the process, and they're doing it in a multisensory way so that they would eventually remember far more than if they just have to memorize things. They would understand what they're doing and how they're doing it. So this is what I'm working on. If you're interested in any of these, of course, send me a WhatsApp message. Like I said, these are currently available. And by the end of the week, the resources in terms of the answers for several of the exercises, like, you have fill in the blanks and different things. I mean, you can figure out the answers your own, but of course, if you have them provided, it'll be easy just to check, check, check kind of thing. So let me know. Now, there's an asterisk here because this worksheet it has like I think 14 activities in it. And so it is definitely going to be more than $50 eventually. But um opening price would be 50. I think I had said 45 last week or the last time I mentioned it, but I think it's worth way more than that. So that's how we're getting into it. So all right. Thank you so much for allowing me to speak about those other things before we get into our activities and discussion for today. Took a bit longer than I anticipated, but I felt it was important to really get a lot of that out. So, all right, report writing. Let's get into the discussion of report writing, speaking on active and passive voice. Now, what exactly is active voice? What exactly is passive voice? Let's clear that up. So, voice in writing it has to do with, where the reader's attention is focused. And so active would be when the focus is on the subject. So who is doing the action? That's the subject of the sentence. And when we write the sentence in such a way that the focus is on the subject, we call that active because the person doing the action is our focus, and that's a very active process happening there. Passive voice, on the other hand, is when the focus is on the action being done and not the person doing the action. So um, we're not really thinking about who is doing it and the fact that they're doing it and connecting the actor and the action to get that very active. We're kind of skipping the person who's doing it altogether and just focusing on the action. And that's why we call that passive, because a lot of times when you shift the sentence, it makes it possible for, we're looking at who is receiving the action and the action itself. And so let me give you an example. In this sentence, we have Adelia kicked the ball. That's active. Adelia is the subject, the verb, which is the action, and then she's kicking the ball. So, we have an object there as well. Adelia kicked the ball. That's active. To make that passive, we have to focus on the action and what received the action. So the ball now becomes the focus of the sentence as well as the action. So the ball was kicked. And then sometimes we can add in who did it. But like I said, remember, we're putting it into passive voice because we really want to focus on the action and who was receiving the action. So most times when you put a sentence in the passive voice, you don't actually include the what you call it. You don't actually include the subject. So you just say the ball was kicked. Now, there's a lot of reason you would want to do something like that in a report. The main reason is that sometimes you don't know who did the action. And one of the other reasons is that you don't know um, the thing that did the action isn't really human, and nobody actually technically did the action. So let's say a student fell and got an injury, then you don't necessarily want to say the student fell and the step injured her. You would say, and her knee was injured, as opposed to the step injured her knee. So it makes for allowing certain kinds of statements and keeping the tone of the report away from opinions and different things. So, what is going to happen once a student knows how to do the active and passive voice, sometimes just naturally in their writing, based on their understanding of what the report is all about, they will use it. But then there are times when they make statements that can come across as opinionated, and the way to fix those statements is to turn the sentence into the passive voice. So this week you are looking at an introduction to passive voice in the event that the student doesn't know what it is, and many of them may not know. Um, it's not something that is actively taught anymore at this level. Some teachers do it. It happens in, students pick it up in terms of writing. They don't know the name of it, that it's active or passive. And if you don't want to use those terms, excuse me, if you don't want to use those terms, that's fine. But at least let them understand that the sentence could be like this, or it could be like this. And this is why you might want to do it like this instead sometimes, right? So this week, during the three sessions, remember it's 30 minutes, 20 to 30, 20 to 30, and then maybe an hour. What you want to do is go through what passive voice is, what it looks like, and maybe do some reading so that students can identify it. So this is what it is, this is what it looks like. So read this passage. Do you see any passive voice here? And have them, just that kind of general discussion. And then in your second session, you want to have students create passive voice, like convert sentences from active to passive voice so that they get into the habit of that. You show them how to do it and they do one or two. And then in the third session, you might give them a worksheet or have them write a paragraph using the passive voice to see how they can integrate it into larger pieces of writing. And of course, if you want to get resources on that, the textbooks, remember I said the Investigating Facts textbook has an entire section on active and passive voice, just as it had on reported speech. There's an entire lesson on active and passive voice, and the practice booklet has worksheets, and then the journal has some extension activities that can help students think about how to use passive voice with report writing, what it would look like in their reports, and how to create some extensions to that. So, as always, we start with presenting what it is, having students practice with it and then do the extension where it is connected to report writing directly. So that's definitely, so that's in there. And for those of you who would be interested in getting a copy of the book, but you don't want to have to use it on your own, when I do my report writing program in August for students, they get a copy of the books in it. So as you can imagine, if the package is 395 for $900, that's an awesome value because you're getting a copy of these books plus some additional sample reports. And I am going to be going through the activities with the students, explaining to them how to do it, and then they would have the practice. So um, reach out and see how you can get the books alone, or you can work with with the August program. And that is from the 5th to the 22nd. It's 3 weeks. We're going to go through each chapter in the text with additional materials that I would be providing for the students. All right, so that is it for the report writing. So what are we looking at with report writing? Active and passive voice. Sometimes focuses on the participant, that's the active voice. Sometimes focuses on the action. And then for the passive voice, you really have to kind of like put it in your own words because you are changing the focus sometimes, right? And so, because you're changing that focus from the person who is doing the action to the person receiving the action, by doing that, what you are is increasing the formal tone of the report. So, for students who are struggling with formal tone, then you really want to get into the passive voice and what that is. So you could definitely search it up online, passive voice for primary school children. You could look, I think K-12 is what the American system calls it. So you can do a search for that. You can get lots of worksheets online. But if you want like dedicated worksheets for our report writing context, let me know and we could work on that. All right. So moving on to narrative writing. This week we are coming down from our high of the climax, literally and figuratively. So remember, the climax is meant to be the most exciting part of the story, and it explains how the characters go through solving the problem. And it's a very active and interesting and exciting process where actions are the focus, and so there's a very strong focus on describing actions and using all the different figurative language and so on and imagery to describe the process of the climax. Well, with that, what happens is that because it's all this major thing happening, when it's finished, characters are going to feel some kind of way. We can't just, okay, the climax is it and that's the end of the story. That is not the end of the story when the climax is done. We still have to wrap up the story. We still have to go through the process of the resolution and, like allowing the dust to settle after the climax. Because if you think about it, while the climax solved the biggest problem in the story, there are still some loose ends to tie up. And that whole process of tying up those loose ends, that is where the falling action and the ending would be. And so falling action, if you really think about it, considering that this was a heightened emotional thing for the main character, the climax, that is heightened emotional situation, they what happens after that is like when the dust begins to settle, the main character is kind of calming down. And as they're calming down, what's going to be happening is that they're going to be feeling things. And they would have been in this heightened state of emotion. Now they're relaxing. And as they're relaxing, they would do certain things and they might think certain things or say certain things. And so allowing readers some insight into what's happening at that point of the story helps complete a story. And so after the height of the climax, what you want to do next is to sort of describe that reaction. And as we are describing that reaction, remember, climax is a major point in the story, heightened emotion. And so, stuff happen, characters are doing things, they're very active. So then when that ends, it's not like a switch that could be switched off in terms of emotions. We have to really gradually bring it in and, conclude it. So the things that we have to remember with the reactions to climax: how characters feel, what characters do, what characters say or think. Right? That should be do. And again, yes, coming out of limited sleep. So we want to have it in three sections. So it's not just a matter of, okay, we're relieved and then we move on. What exactly does that relief look like in terms of feelings? We want to have that described. And then when characters are relieved, what do they do? They're no longer in fight mode. They've calmed down. So what do they do at this point? And then, having calmed down or being in the process of calming down, they're going to be thinking some things about that whole drama that they've just been through. Now that they're on the other side of it, what's next? And what are they thinking? Are they, I'm relieved, but I'm thinking, I know this is not the end of this. Or I may be thinking, I have some time I could rest. Or I may be thinking, this is such a good thing I got help. Otherwise, I could have died. And so characters are going to be thinking things and they might say things to other characters in this process of calming down and in this process of moving from this heightened fight attitude. I have to fight to get my goal and I have to fight the villain and I have to, fight against the forces to solve the problem. After I'm calming down from that, I have to do some things. I might have to pick up some pieces. Things could have gotten broken in the whole drama. I might have to do some cleaning up. And while I'm cleaning up, I might be thinking, it could have been worse. And I might be telling my friends, thank you for being there for me. So, what exactly is happening as we react to the heightened emotional part of the story? So, it's something to really think about, but remember again, we want to pay attention to the issue of the climax being that heightened part of the story. And so coming down from that, this is what we're doing. So this week, we're making sure that the students understand the climax and the fact that things have to happen after the climax. We want to make sure they understand feel, do, think. It's three parts of reactions: feel, do, think. And so focus on that. So that's in the first session, again, three sessions of practice. In the first session, discuss what this reaction to climax is, where it's located in the story, the fact that it comes after the climax. Many people call it falling action. So there are different ways to look at it in terms of what it's labeled, but what it actually is would be after the character has accomplished what they've accomplished. And now the dust begins to settle. How do they feel? What do they do? What do they think? And that's the focus, and that's your first session, making sure the student understands that. Second session would be looking at examples. of falling action. In a story, especially a micro story, the kind that students are writing for SEA, in a micro story, the reaction to climax could be two, three sentences. So, like one sentence that includes how they feel and what they do, one sentence speaks about what they think. Or you can do one sentence each. One sentence describing how they feel, one sentence describing what they do, one sentence describing what they think. And we're making these sentences as descriptive and expressive as we can. And so that's your falling action. It is not necessarily a complicated thing, but we want to make sure that we have all three elements here. And so, second session, have students do a little bit of practice about writing these things. How do they feel? How does the character feel? What do they do? What do they think? So, you're reading some examples and doing a little practice. And then in your third session, you want to give the students a prompt, have them plot, and then focus on that section to sort of really deal with it, write it into a paragraph kind of thing. And so you really want to just expand their thinking on that. And of course, if you are looking for additional support with that, we have the 12-point plot, the poster, and the flashcards with explanations. There's the activity, and there are some videos that you could look at that help you really understand that. And then in my August program, I'm doing an August program with the um, narrative storytelling. This one is 3 p.m., same August 5th to 22nd. I am including this. So, this poster and stuff, I'm including it in it. Plus, you're getting the sample stories, 12 stories digital booklet. So, altogether, it's almost like half of what you're paying for the program. So I really tried to give as much value as possible in the August programs because my intention is to provide you with the resources. This program is only 3 weeks. This is pretty much an introduction to all of this and showing students for each point they would be gaining the skills. But after the 3 weeks, what do? You need to have continuous materials that you could work with and practice. And so the digital booklets has sample stories, prompts, formats, information about editing and revising and plotting and so on. And you'd have all the sessions recorded so that you can go back and review and practice with guidance because you're getting the booklets, the flashcards, and the poster and the recorded session. Right? So again, reach out and see, if that's a program that you'd really want to get into. All right. So the last thing that we're looking at today would be our introduction to poetry. So it's like our first look. And this week we are shifting from fiction writing and we're getting into really trying to understand poetry. And so, one of the first things that I think I hear all the time students say, well, poetry is so difficult to read. Poetry is the worst part of the comprehension for them. And I personally think it's because we're approaching poetry the wrong way. And it's not a matter of, okay, there's some fancy, fantastic way. It's just really a subtle change and really one thing that shifts and helps students recognize how to read poetry properly and how to respond to it properly. And I'm going to tell you what that is. And that's it. Poems are stories. When we read fiction, we have all the paragraphs and we have all those things, and we know it's a story. We see the characters, we get the descriptions and all of that. And so we know stories in that way. But poems are also stories. And if we get students to shift just a little, it's not like if we're changing completely everything, but it can't feel like that when you get that aha. So that's why kind of thing. Poems are stories. And when you think about it, you read a poem, poems have characters. Poems have a point and a plot. Poems have a message or a point of view. These are elements of stories. Poems describe settings. Poems use figurative language and imagery. So the difference between fiction writing and poetry is the way it's presented. So fiction writing has paragraphs and those kinds of things. Poems will have verses, stanzas, lines. So the presentation of the information is different. But think about a poem like a story that's been condensed. Excuse me. So you have this 5 paragraph story and you're scrunching it down to as few words as possible and you're arranging it in stanzas, then you get a poem. So you're starting with the whole story with all the explanations and details, and you're taking out all the unnecessary, unnecessary, unnecessary. We don't have time for all of that. Just give me the bare bones of this story in the most exciting way possible. We bring it down to a poem. And so when students make that shift and they begin thinking about poems as stories and not as this convoluted thing that, Miss, I don't understand what a line mean, they begin to read poems differently. And so when they read poems now, understanding that a poem is a story, they would be able to look for the main character of the story. And then they would try to figure out the plot and the actions that are happening in the story. And then they would look for the message of the poem because there would be a story with a message, with characters and plot. And so they shift from what is this to there's a story in here somewhere and I could find it. So let me see. Who is this about? What are they doing? What do they want? How are they trying to get what they want? What are the obstacles that are facing them? What do they do in response to these obstacles? And what's the point of this poem? The writer is telling a story for a purpose. And so, what's the purpose? How is this opinion or point of view being shared with readers? So even if students don't understand all the language, all the vocabulary, all the similes, metaphors, and these things, they might miss some of that if they look at reading a poem with the understanding that this is a story, someone is telling me a story, and I know these are the elements of a story. So I am looking in this poem to find that story, then it is going to really help them understand poetry a whole lot better. And you would be surprised at the kind of interaction and the kind of understanding you get after students begin reading poetry in this particular way. And so that's the recommendation that I would make. Definitely work on that. So for this week, in the introduction to poetry, most definitely you want to have students reading more and more poetry, not just poems for comprehension, but you want to have them reading some poems for fun as well. Maybe even trying their hand at writing a few. And that's what they're just exploring and having fun with it this week. And in terms of poetry, I have my copy here. I have a colleague who the name of the book actually is Poetry. Um, quite a few fun and interesting poems in here, and just just for fun, some just for fun, some thinking stuff. Let me see if I could find. So here's one that this one is just like what, one, two, three, four, five, six lines. And some of them you might think are a little advanced for students at this age, but just have them read it and ask them what they think about it. There's um, nothing adult oriented. They're all fun and interesting poems. So this one says, "You made your bed, go lie in it," they say. But God says differently, as the scriptures convey. His grace encompasses us all like a blanket on a cold, rainy night. Resting in his presence brings comfort, removing any fright. What a calming reassurance to be wrapped up in grace when we take one look upon his precious and holy face. So a student could read this and you can find um, there's a simile in there. So, you could read poems and find very interesting concepts, so that students could really kind of expand their thinking. Lots of stuff that they can discuss. So here's another one, zonal games. Maxicum party now start. Everybody journey to Larry Gomes stadiums to watch the student athletes take part. Lunch bags packed with bongo, cocoa crisp, and cheesies, and $10 in hand to buy snow cone and lollies. I scream from the top of my lungs as my friend wins his first race. He beams with pride as sweat drips down his face. 3, 6, 9. Yes, it's box lunchtime. The atmosphere is electric, it feels so sublime. I head home that evening, clothes stained and without a voice. That's only way to do zonal games. You have no other choice. So interesting poems, like I said, and most of them rhyme. And when we start talking about next week, when we continue with looking at the questions and looking at the format and different things in poetry, you would realize that the there are different kinds of poems. Not all of them rhyme, and to be honest, like this week, the last week and this week with my comprehension class, we are actually also studying poetry. Remember I said like a lot of the format that I use in terms of the journey to SEA, these are things that I'm doing with my students as well. And we read through the 2019 to 2024 exam poems, and you'd realize that things kind of changed somewhere in the middle. And then the 2024 poems kind of started to bring it back a little bit to the level of poetry that most students at this primary school age are familiar with. And certainly the kind of poems that we were familiar with when we were kids, the fun rhyming ones. Some of those essay poems get really kind of, I would say, technical because of the way they're formatted. But if you read the poem as a story, none of that would matter too much because you'd be getting and looking for certain kinds of information to help you understand what's going on and help you answer the questions. So whether it's technical or it's not, whether it rhymes or it's not or it doesn't matter if you approach it as a story being told in poetry form. So like that one I just read, zonal games, right? In the zonal games, we are, let me see, I can't find it back. I just opened it and it landed on that page. Well, here what guys, get your copy. Poetry, you can look him up, poetry.com. No, not dot com, on Facebook is his Facebook page. The Poetry, I think it is. Kieran Isaac is his name. Um, but that one, Zonal Games, it tells a story. Ah, finally I found it. It tells a story, the beginning of the story. Maxi come, party now start. Beginning of the story. Everybody go in this place. What's happening in the middle of the story? Lunch game, lunch bags packed, $10 in hand to buy snow cone. We're on the way. All of that background information. And then middle of the story. I scream from the top of my lungs as my friend wins his first race. So we have a conflict of sorts. He's running a race. He wants to win. We know what the character wants. We have a character talking about his friend and, issue of buck lunch. And then end of story. I head home that evening. Falling action, things coming down. Clothes stained and without a voice. Reaction. And then final conclusion. What is the lesson? What's the message? That's the only way to do zonal games. You have no other choice. That is all, right? So, beginning, middle, end. So, you see the story with poetry. So, this week, read some poetry with your child, with your students. Get them to see that poems are stories. So, in the first session, get them to understand what a poem is, all the elements of poetry, imagery, etc., etc. Yes. Second session, just read some poems, understand that poem is a story, so have them identify beginning, middle, end. Who is speaking? What are they talking about? What's the message? And then third session, do more of that. So you're spending a lot of time reading poems and just discussing it, reading and understanding and discussing poetry in, stories in poetry. Let me put it that way. I think that's the better way to say it. We're discussing stories in poems. And so that's what you're doing this week. Yes, we're going to get to the comprehension and the questions, but students need to understand what they're reading in order to be able to decipher the information. And so if you want to get some support with that, well, two options. Of course, with the August program, when we do comprehension, we are going to do all of the fiction, nonfiction, poetry included, and graphics. So we're doing all of that. And everything that I've told you in terms of we study the concept itself. So, what is poetry? We do some reading of poems. We discuss the story in the poem. And then we do, go through questions, analyzing the questions and, how to answer them, the whole process. This one is a late class, half 5 to half 7 during the August period. Same time, 5th to the 22nd. So if you want that kind of me doing it for you, hands-on help, then you can get that. If you want the comprehension on a whole, you want some practice. So you see here for this, you're getting the ELA exam answers, which would be this here for 150. If you want to get the exam answers alone, it's 150. I have them grouped so you could focus on poetry alone, you could focus on the passage alone, focus on graphic alone, um and each spelling by itself, grammar by itself, punctuation by itself. And so you can do that and really study the past papers. I guarantee you, studying the past papers with possible answers is going to really help your students understand stuff. And then again, I don't know, guys. I've been really thinking about how to help my students and what they need, and I've decided to make some comprehension practice activities available. Now, in the August group, you'll be getting 16 unique exercises, but for this one, for the $50, you're getting 8. So I'm just going to put in an 8 there when I finish this one because I have 8 right now. So two fiction passages, two non-fiction passages, two poems, and two graphics. And of course, if you know me by now, I never just give you something here, have this. There's always an introduction with some notes and explanations about things. So a lot of what I just told you in terms of how to read poetry and I've also included like a sheet like a kind of cheat sheet with a list of the different types of questions that you might likely see. So you get that plus the 8 exercises for $50. But of course, if you are more interested in me working with your child, then in August, I will be doing that. You'll get this eight plus another eight that I'll be creating in July. So come July, I'm not having classes with groups. I'm just going to be continuing with my one-on-ones so that I can have that extra time. Instead of working on the group classes, I would be completing these other eight so that when we get to August, you would get 16 altogether. Of course, if you're not going to be able to make that August, you can get a copy of the eight that I have now. And then when I'm finished with that other eight at the end of July, probably mid July, I might be finished. When I'm finished with the other eight, they would also become available for another $50. And so if you put all this together, that would be $250 value that's included in this. And of course, there's a lot more, right? Because I have a sheet on, with I think it was like about 60 or 75 words to describe personality, information on describing mood and tone with poetry. And so we have a few additional worksheets and stuff that come with the program that you would get. And of course, recorded online session so that when you're finished, you have the worksheets, you have the practice and activities, and you get a copy of the session that you could review during the term September to December to continue practicing. And of course, I will be creating more of these worksheets, but remember, it's not an ELA pass, like a practice test. We're focusing specifically on comprehension. So you're only getting the section two of the paper. So you'd be getting fiction passages, non-fiction passages, poems, and graphics. Unique, all created unique to practice. And the answers are going to be uploaded online, so I'm working on getting the answers online so that you could have access to it. So once you purchase the package, you get the digital copy of the exams, or the practice worksheets, and then you could log in, you'd get a password and so on. You'd log in and all the answers would be there that you can double check, after your child or students have done the comprehension. So, so that's it. So that's what I have to offer. And I figured, this week I would do a little bit more than just giving you the information because I really want you to see that I understand that you need the resources as well. So me telling you about it is one thing, but when you're finished here, you need to be able to pull a worksheet and say, hey, this is what I'm doing with my child. And you work on things and get some feedback and whatnot. So I am diligently working on compiling more worksheets and more practice activities for you so that you'd be able to follow along and do as much as you can to support your child toward SEA 2025 and beyond, actually, because um, this a lot of the materials that I have could work with standard fours, and I am actively creating materials for standard threes and twos. And eventually, by the end of the year, I should also have worksheets for standard ones. So there you have it. We looked at active and passive voice. We looked at the reaction to climax, and we looked at reading poetry. And so you have your stuff cut out for you this week, and so you know what you have to do. Set aside your time and work on it. And of course, if you would like to get a copy of any of the resources that I have available, send me a WhatsApp message, send me a message on Facebook, and I'll let you know how you can get it. And certainly, the WhatsApp 717-4993. Let me just go back. It's at the bottom of the screen here. Right? 717-4993. You should be able to see it there. and you'll be able to get the information you need. So all right. So, yeah, this one was a little bit different because I kind of started off on that really sobering note with the graduations and supporting kids who may not necessarily have that kind of support as we think and we know that, kids need to really feel loved and so on. But we did cover what was on schedule today. And one final plug from my friend, if you want to get a copy of this book and you can't find Poetry on Facebook, let me know. I'll send you information about him as well so you can get a copy of the book. All right. And so that's it. We're at the end. And oh, for those of you who've been following, you know that this year I changed some of the graphics and the look of the sessions, and I'm trying to do things a little bit more structured. I finally completed the exit. Remember, I used to just play the beginning twice, beginning and the end. I finally completed it. So take a look. We're finished today, so I'm gonna, end it off. Tell me what you think, and we'll I'm looking forward to getting your feedback on that. I tried to, add in a little bit more information. So we'll see. Take a look at the ending. Tell me what you think. And blessings in your endeavors this week. Tomorrow is a holiday. You can organize yourself. I'm spending a lot of my holiday tomorrow completing some of these worksheets because, yes, I tell you, I'm obsessed with them. I just feel like I need to get them done as soon as possible so that people can start using them. All right. So have a good one. Take a break, at least some of it tomorrow. Take some break, right? Because we do come back and then there's a weekend. But take a little break. Enjoy yourself in between. But yeah, have a good one and I'll see you next week. All right. Bye bye.